YouTube crowd. Thank you for coming in. Looks like we got somebody waiting in the waiting room, so welcome. My name is Amelie, and I am happy to deliver Soulestic Intelligence podcast to you. This is I guess it'll be the eighth one that I've done, so I'm very excited to be here. I sound funny. I hit my lip in on my trip, and so that's why I've kind of been away from talking too much. But we are going to go ahead and finish up with Villainy, which is what we were talking about last week. So, just kind of a recap, this is an archetype that all of us experience. So, there shouldn't be any surprises there. Like we all have this capacity to have this villainous nature about us, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you watched last week's video, you know that there's a lot of lessons and learning that go on in that villain archetype, and it's it's the anti-hero part of our nature, and totally okay. Some people find it hard because when they hear shadow or they hear something's bad, we've all been programmed to think that just because something is bad doesn't mean that it doesn't serve us. And there's a lot that can go into that service. So we talked a little bit about some of the common villains in our culture as well. The culture being literature or literary characters or maybe even movie characters. Oh my gosh. Thanks, Jerusha. Good to see you, honey. I'm glad you're able to join me. What else did we talk about? Let's see my notes here. See if I can figure out where I left off. Oh, we've got so many things. All right. So we also talked about some psychological parts of the or psychological significance of the villain archetype. We talked about some of the characteristics, and we did some examples. So we did some literature, we did some media, and we did some kind of everyday life, like somebody that you know in your circle might have a really strong villain archetype. And so and like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of lessons that go into the villain and the hero. Like we tend to like focus more on the hero, but there is a lot of learning in that villainy side of it. And a big reason why I'm choosing these really heavy topics is because it helps you to kind of move through some of the gunk and junk that's in your energy field that you may or may not recognize, or you may or may not see, and maybe others see it in you and you're like, why are they acting that way towards me? Why is this happening? Why is that person reacting this way? Maybe you just don't even see it or completely blind to it, which is okay. And I talk a little bit about that, like empathy, empath versus the narcissist. And it's not really a versus, but you've got these like two polarizing characters fighting with each other for dominance. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think if we kind of balance out and find the harmony in both of these characteristics or personality traits, that you can find a really nice inner peace, because we don't want to just shun the narcissist because they've hurt us or whatever. Just like we don't want to shun the empath because who knows that they even exist, right? All right. So now that we've laid out that this is a teacher, that's really kind of the recap of what we're going to do. We're going to look at looking at a little bit deeper of how you can kind of move through some pieces of yourself that you may or may not see, and how to get to a place where you're in harmony and that you're learning the lessons that you need to learn from that. Because if you're feeling whatever the villain is feeling, so we can talk a little bit about so a little bit of a reflection of what a villain might be feeling, or somebody with a heavy villain archetype, or maybe it's a small one that you're wanting to address. You can look at some of that. So obviously the villain is important. The villain is important because it gives the hero's journey something to fight against, because that's really what we're doing in our mythologies, in our life, and then within ourselves. I think even more importantly, we're just looking at this inner window of what's going on inside and why am I feeling that way. So some of the villain characteristics might feel like a projection. It might feel suppressed. You might not see it. Maybe others do see it, and they're like, "Hey, you're acting like this," and you're like, "What are you talking about?" And that continues to happen until like that aha moment of epiphany comes around. The role of the villain in personal transformation journey is to really tap into deep emotions that are fairly low. So anger is a big one, jealousy is a big one, and fear is a big one. So if you're feeling anger, jealousy, or fear, parts of you are experiencing the kind of a little bit of that villain archetype, and nobody can say that they haven't felt any of those feelings. Those are very common feelings, and they're okay to have those feelings. The problem is when they kind of just sink into your being, and then it just sits there as undisturbed energy, and then it starts infecting every other part of your life. Maybe it's infecting your relationships with your family, your relationships with your friends, your relationships with potential partners. These are all pieces that can be affected by having those feelings and not dealing with them. So the role of the villain is to dive deep into those feelings and to face them in the best way that you can, is to feel that personal transformation, to really deepen into that. And then, as I said, it's okay to have those feelings. These are purpose and catalysts to help us grow and shift out of that. And when you start to do that and you start shedding these older parts of or these, I don't want to say older, when you start shedding these parts of yourself that you don't want to carry around anymore, or that you've addressed, like you can really just let it go, you start to feel lighter. And then that villainy part of yourself starts to shift into a more lighter side of you. So some of the issues with being in that wounded feeling is, yeah. Oh, Jessica, hi Jess, is saying, I've felt them. I have felt them. Dude, I felt them on a pretty deep level when I was reviewing the emotions wheel. I was really staring at it and I was like, oh my gosh, I am harboring so much anger in my body. And it was a real eye opener of like, even though I've been doing tons and tons of this shadow work and really diving deep into feelings, I still like come up with stuff. I'm still like bringing things forward. And it's not just from triggering. I was just reading about this emotions wheel, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here I think that I'm sitting in a heavy disgust, but really it's a lot of anger. There's just a lot of anger there. So that wounding gives us an idea of where we're at. So I know that the word trigger is typically overused, and because it's so overused and so cliche, I don't typically like to use it, but it really is this emotional response from within ourselves of when we start to feel. So if you start to feel anger, you can feel it. It's a fire that burns inside of you. If you feel fear, it's like you freeze. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't do whatever it is. And that fear is just like present right there. Or even jealousy. Like I felt envy and jealousy this year on a big scale. And it took a lot of courage for me to just face that because my initial response is, I'm not an envious or jealous person. And I had to like really face that and say, oh, I'm feeling that because I have these woundings from my childhood that I need to deal with. And so once you start to really face it and say, oh, a an emotion, this is a feeling that I'm feeling for a reason to help clean up some of this, younger inner child junk that I haven't cleaned up. It was a nice big trigger, like a shadow trigger. And as I am thinking on it and unpacking it and really doing some deep self-reflection to see where or why am I standing here, I found that I had a mother, father, and sister wound all wrapped into one that was really revelationary to be able to like sit there and go through that. So I really encourage every single one of you, if you're feeling, especially if you feel a feeling and you're like, oh, that's not me, to like really like, okay, let's really own it. It is me. My body is telling me something that I need to face. And here is here's me doing a deep dive and a reflection of that. So once you do some self-reflection and do some exercises and journaling is one of the ways you can do that. We talked a little bit about if you go back to episode 6 and go to the Shadow Worth podcast that I did a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of helpful information in there. You don't want to just like tear yourself apart and ravage yourself so you're just like sitting there bloodied like, oh my god, what have I done, like that you can't get out of it. I want you to be able to get out of it, like to get out of it healthily, to get out of it safely. If you need to dive deep into something that you're wanting to work on, and sometimes it's because I feel like emotions are like water. So the deeper that you go, the darker and danker and cloudier. You're not going to have clear vision. It's not going to be like, you're not going to be able to see like anything that's going on around you. So it kind of becomes a little bit of this chaos. It becomes a little trepidatious, like you don't know if you're going to get in or get out, and it can be really terrifying. So it's really helpful to have somebody like a therapist or a coach or even a friend if you have a good friend or a good family member that you're like, oh, okay, I can go on this journey with, I can go dive deep into here, and you're going to pull me out if I need to be brought back to like the surface, if I need to be brought back to breathe and just be really grounded in that, because diving into chaos can be really scary. And I feel like even on this inner journey as we're going to into it, it can be terrifying. So do it gently. Don't try to take on too much that you can't handle it, and it causes even more trauma for you. We're looking to heal these things slowly. It does take time. It's not something that you can just like happen overnight. Hi, Abigail. Oh my gosh, things are seasoning up. All right. So I encourage you to go back to that. And a lot of the times with how I like to move around and some of the suggestions that I've had is to do things that identify things that when you were a child you loved doing. So, for example, I loved writing, I loved reading, I loved coloring, especially so creating, doing all these things. For me, that is a method that I can go to and report to do some healing. So if I went and I got a coloring book and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to color and then think on whatever the thing that I'm working on. And so as I'm coloring and making and focusing on that, I can put some of that energy into that work. And it could even be like if you loved hiking or playing games, or if you like for me, I love swimming. So swimming is a good exercise for me to get some of that energy out, because as a child, I that's how I expressed myself. So from whatever young age, those things that you love to do, like really focus in on those things, because it's not a one size fits all on all of these things. I I find that you find the things that you love to do, that you can connect back into that inner child. So find the things that you did like to do as a child, and that will help you connect even deeper into what was going on, and you can kind of help place some of these feelings that may feel a bit misplaced now, but they have a reason for sitting in your body and staying there. All right. And then finally, we'll do we'll talk about having compassion. So this is another part of it where I'm saying find the things that your child loved to you as a child loved to do, and then focus on that part of you. So we're looking for compassion for the whatever wrongs that you feel in your body, and we're trying to bring those up and then change the story of, okay, that happened, here's how I'm going to resolve it. So for example, as I said, I had these three wounds, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I had these wounds, and I'm like, oh, I'm not really upset at that person, or I'm not really envious or jealous of that person. The situation is triggering me because I have these unresolved issues with my parental structure as a child. And so now I can say, I did have those feelings. It was there, there was merit to it. However, now I can move on from that. That's not something that I want to define me anymore. And now I can let it go. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for teaching me this deep thing about myself, and for giving me the energy to get through it. So that kind of stuff. All right. Doo-doo. All right. Go back to my notes here. All right. The next thing that I want to talk about is I want to discuss the areas. I have three specific areas of the 26 modalities, or areas of emotional intelligence that a villain archetype might struggle with. So, as I said, everybody is going to have these villain archetype traits in one way or another, but there are specific traits that the villain is going to experience on a deeper level than, say, like the hero. So the first one is self-awareness. So self-awareness is the part of the module that, your self-assessment, your personal power. So we're looking at these parts of ourselves. So this is definitely a self part of the puzzle here. So their struggle is with the self-awareness piece, they often have a hard time understanding their own emotions, their motivations, or even the root cause of why they're behaving in this way or why they feel a certain way towards something, because they just don't know. And actually, it's not surprising to me because a lot of people don't even know how they're feeling in a moment, even when they don't have anything going on. Their self awareness is low. The good news is you can raise your levels of self awareness. The narcissist can become more empathetic. It takes time and dedication, but they can do it. Everybody has the ability to clear out of those feelings. So, a lot of the times, they're unresolved issues, traumas, woundings, insecurities. So, they have a hard time understanding their own personal triggers. They're having a hard time understanding or recognizing how something can make them feel a certain way. I'll give you an example. So, for me personally, I've had, and I'm just going to bear all. I've had an issue with my male relationships in my life. So, as a child, I did not have a strong male role model in my life. And so, because of that, it caused me to act out, even though during the time that I was doing that, I didn't recognize that that's why it was. But I now see how that happened because of that lack of relationship. So that wound, that father wound that I had, I can even, looking back, I can see like when it started and how it played out. And how it played out is I have all these, I have these relationships with men that are all emotionally disconnected. So instead of me being emotionally connected to them, there's almost this anxious attachment that I just want them to be there and not leave me. And that's the wound. And until a woman or a man can resolve that anxious attachment, then the underlying insecurity of them being okay with being themselves, with being seen for who they are, with for loving who they are, until that gets resolved. And I know that I'm not the only one. I went through it so that I can teach it. That until they can see that insecurity, until they can identify the wounding, that they're going to have these struggles with self awareness. All right. So, the other part of this is I could have handled this in a couple of different ways. So, the way that I handled it is I identified it and then I did the work to get out of it. I'm like, okay, I don't want to be the anxious attachment. I want to be okay and love me and be okay with me and be satisfied in that. I don't want to reach out to others to have them as a validation for myself. I don't need that. So that was the first thing that I did. If I did it another way, I could have said, oh, yeah, I didn't have a dad, and that's why I treat everybody, I just keep them distant from me. I'm not going to resolve that. And I'm justified in that because my parent chose this and my other parent chose that, and that's the hand that I was dealt. That's where the villain archetype comes in, because then it's a it's a continuous road of lack of self-love in that. Because if you loved yourself, you'd want to heal yourself. But if you want to sit in your wounding and stay justified in that wound, that's when it will just continue to perpetuate. And we all know women like this. They go from one relationship, then something happens. Then they go to another relationship, or they break up. And then they jump into another relationship immediately, like rebound, and then the same thing happens. They break up because they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And then it's just a string of relationships where they haven't resolved their issue. And so they attract the same outcome. And that's insanity, as many of us would say. So, and there's other ways that you can move around this, but those are the few ways I'm going to say. The lack of self-awareness can lead to these destructive behaviors. So if you want to continue in this path of destruction where you're not resolving that inner healing, and you're going to continually get into relationships with people that also have some certain wounding, because if you're with somebody that is attracted to your wound, then it's going to be a net negative instead of a net positive. It doesn't, the law of absolute, so there's a mathematical law of absolute that even negative one and one are, since they're the same distance, it's the same. So if you have a terrible boyfriend and you have a great boyfriend, it's the same. It's just wherever you are in your energy. You could be a -4, you can be a plus, or you can be a +4. You're still it's still 4. So you're choosing to be in that net negative or net positive. Hopefully that made sense. With the villain archetype, there's almost this I don't want to say irresponsible, but they're unable to take responsibility for their actions when they're in this lack of self-awareness, because it's basically you're running around blind. You don't even know what's going on, why you're doing it. You're just kind of on this animalistic or almost animal nature of going through life and not using your higher mind. You're just going through life of continuously getting into these net negative relationships. When, like for me, after my last relationship, I was like, okay, I'm stopping, and I don't want to be in that situation again. I want to be in a positive relationship with myself. And so I definitely took time to do actual work to get to where I'm at now. And that doesn't always happen. So, I mean, I've done it in the past as well, where I've kind of gotten in and out of these, I don't say they're negative relationships, because they did feel great at the time. There was a lot of lessons that were learned, but at the end of the day, the real person that I should have gotten in a relationship with was with me, if that makes sense. I needed to go deeper into who I was, how I was, develop a higher self-awareness, which once you start getting on this path, it escalates really quickly. So it might seem really slow at first, but then it starts compounding, and then that compounding version of yourself, as you're like developing yourself, that compounding version of yourself becomes even more and more heightened. And then the self-awareness is like, it's so quick. Like now things will pop up and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I kind of deliberate over it, and it doesn't take me months. Maybe it'll take me weeks, but instead of taking months or even years like it has in the past, now it's taking weeks, because I've done so much inner work and have all these tools now that I've used and seen become basically made manifest. I was able to move through those. So now when something does occur, I can quickly harness in, where is it? Why is it? How am I going to rewrite the story? Here's all the things that I know how to do. Let me activate all those things. So self-awareness is the first piece. that of the 26 areas, these are the top three. So self-awareness is a big one. People with low self-awareness typically fall into that narcissistic personality trait. I think that because of the amount of lack of self-awareness that we have in our society, that's why we're seeing this rise of that person's a narcissist. I don't want to say that they are a narcissist, they have narcissistic traits. A person with high self awareness is going to be more empathetic. So the higher self awareness you have, the likely higher your empathy is. Like those are going to be correlated on a really deep scale. Which brings us to empathy. So empathy is number 2. So this is another one of the 26 key areas of emotional intelligence. So a lot of people, when they think about emotional intelligence, they automatically assume empathy, and that's it. There's nothing else to emotional intelligence but empathy. And to a certain degree, that's like what our society has basically shown. I'm here to say it's more, that we're going to learn more about what emotional intelligence is because it's way more than just empathy, but that is a common one that people are they associate it with that. So the villains struggle to see situations from another person's perspective. They they have a hard time understanding or even caring about why somebody might have these emotions. They're a little calloused. They're thinking about themselves and then why think about others when I'm the one that's the most important. They prioritize themselves, their desires, their pain, and they often ignore the cries of others of like, this is what you're doing to me, or this is how I feel about whatever. So they dismiss and they invalidate the emotions of others. And they view people as obstacles or tools. And I think this is where that narcissist, like, people are looking at them as if they are a tool to be used and manipulated, rather than seeing people as individuals, as their own person with their own experiences and needs and feelings. And so they tend to have like this low empathy. The lack of empathy creates conflict, isolation, and the inability to form meaningful connections, which kind of reinforces all these villainous tendencies. This desire to kind of one up others and then use them for their own devices. I do want to say that in this world of low self awareness, in this world of low empathy, and in this world of pointing the finger and blaming the narcissist for being the way that they are, that even the person that is being manipulated or used or abused or whatever from the narcissist, those people that are being manipulated have a responsibility equally to have boundaries, to say, you're not going to do that to me because I love myself enough that you're not using me in that way. So why do I say that? I feel convicted when I see large groups of my ex is a narcissist, or like pointing the finger at other people instead of pointing it at themselves, of like, well, why did this situation happen? Why didn't I stick up for myself? Why didn't I say something and stop that person from manipulating me? So it goes both ways. I'm a firm believer in that. Just because there's villains out there doesn't necessarily make the person that's the victim the hero. They're not. The hero is somebody that does stick up for themselves. The hero is somebody that does dig themselves out of this lack of emotional aware or self-awareness and this lack of personal empathy for others. So as we're looking at those two factors and we're just reviewing culture and where it is, I really encourage people, not that it gnaws on me, that's the way that I see it. If you're going to sit there and have a victim mentality, or if you're going to victimize people, like both of those things are negative. There's no lesser of two evils there. They're both not good. The goodness is becoming the hero of either of those two pieces. So jumping out of that and becoming the hero in your story. The final one is emotional regulation. And oh my gosh, if you would have met me as a younger lady, I would definitely say that I had a little bit more empathy than others, but the lack of emotional regulation is definitely one that I struggled with hardcore. I've broken things, I've pulled knives. I mean, I've done all kinds of crazy things that you could even imagine. I've put myself into some precarious situations. And so this is why I say, like, that villain archetype, we've all experienced that, maybe me to a different degree than most people, but I will admit to that. Just real talk, I've pulled hoops out. So emotional regulation is exactly what it sounds like. You're able to be regulated in your emotions. So when you have anger, you're not just like spitting fire at the person next to you. You're feeling it, letting it move through your body, honoring it, and then figuring out, why is this emotional response happening? Why is this trigger happening? Where does it come from? Why is this situation showing me this right now? Why is my body giving me that feeling right now of of anger? So villains often have the difficulty of managing these intense emotions. They are intense emotions, like anger, resentment, and fear are all very heavy, low vibration feelings that definitely pull on our energy field. These emotions may drive impulsive or destructive actions. So if you're feeling angry and you're in the moment in this situation and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this feeling and now I'm going to direct it out because I don't want to direct it in. So you direct it out and you yell at your kid or something because they created a mess in the kitchen. That is a lack of emotional regulation. And so what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to really not necessarily control it, but we're wanting to move it up and out of our heads. And we'll work through a couple. I'll at least show you that one, which is a good way to, like, okay, I feel it, I'm honoring it. Doesn't feel good, but it's in my body, and then you basically like move it out of your body. So, like I just said, that person can react aggressively or manipulatively instead of pausing and processing that emotion. So that pause process of where you're like, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm not feeling it. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to let it move through. That's emotional regulation. And then finally, letting bitterness or revenge dictate their decisions rather than seeking constructive solutions. So the feelings of bitterness or revenge I think I didn't do a post here, but I think I mentioned it. But so I'm leaving my job, and a part of me is like, just doesn't feel connected to it anymore. And so part of me is like a little sad because I'm like, oh, I used to have these really great relationships with these people. And now I don't know. I think maybe I've changed so much that it's hard. But then there's also this bitterness of like, why didn't they relate to me, or why didn't they connect with me, or what is going on here that is causing me to feel that way. So I can react in one of two ways. I can be like, oh well, you guys left me for left me for nothing, and so now you guys can kind of deal with the problems yourself. Or in the way that I did it, I was like, you know what, I'm not a good fit here anymore. Let's figure out a solution to get me to exit. Here's the timeline that I would like to see it happen in, and let's pull some triggers to make it happen. So those are two different ways that I could have handled it. I could have been like, screw you guys, I'm out of here. Sayonara. I don't want to have anything more to do with you. And honestly, I do still kind of feel that way sometimes, but then I'm like, just be a kind human. Just be a kind human. You're parting in a more delicate way than normal, and just let it go. So those are two different ways that I could have handled that one situation. The impact of emotional regulation or lack thereof is it can lead to self-sabotaging behavior. I could have burned a bridge. Strained relationships, I the communication with people is already strained enough. Do I want it to be non-existent? Not necessarily. I still value those people as humans. And then the inability to create positive outcomes from challenging situations. So I took a situation where I wasn't feeling connected. I had to make a decision of, am I going to stay or I'm going to go? If I stay, I'm probably going to be really miserable. If I go, it's a little scary. It's kind of this like, what am I going to do? Hero's journey of just jumping out and surrendering to God and figuring out, what do I want to do with my life? Which is why I'm here. Like I would love to be an impact to people and to help them to move through these things, to develop their emotional intelligence skills, because it's going to be very valuable as we progress into this new world, which we can already feel the old world is dying. So if you're feeling that old world is dying and that there's a new world coming in, I don't know if we want to call it world or age or culture or experience, like there's definitely some sort of shift that's happening. And I think a lot of people are experiencing in one way or another. And in order for us to get from point A to point B, having really strong emotional intelligence is going to help. This is going to help you connect with others. It's going to help you build trust with others. It's help you communicate with others and have boundaries, and to come into new groups with people and then have a nice rapport, because you're going to be able to, one, have a positive social awareness of how others are feeling and how, like, kind of the vibe of the groups that you're in. And then on the other end, you are going to be able to hold yourself in a really strong way by having really solid boundaries, by having confidence, and by having a really solid character, because you're going to know who you are. Nobody's going to be able to shake that. And when you come into cross paths with others, they're going to see that in you. They're going to see that light shining within you. And this emotional intelligence is a big part of that. These three pieces that we've talked about today are just like 3 of 26. Like there's a lot of other things that you can learn to really strengthen that piece within you that connects to others. This is the way that we socialize with people. It's the way that we understand ourselves and how we mirror and reflect on one another. So that's why I'm getting into this and why I find it so valuable. All right, so we talked about the struggles in this part of the villain archetype and why it matters in this shadow work. So there's a lot of growth opportunities here. And like I said, there's so many people out there that have very low self-awareness of even how they feel. If you ask a person, "Oh, how do you feel about that?" A lot of the times they'll say, "I don't know." And that's the reality of the situation. People don't know how they feel about stuff. And if they do, they say, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm happy. I'm sad." You know, it is very short, very almost carelessly thought instead of going deep inside and saying, "You know what? I feel rejected," or "I feel invigorated. This is exciting." I think we have a tendency to like focus on the happier ones and not really define the lower vibe emotions of how we're feeling. Once you can identify it, it helps to really bring it up and you're like, "Oh, I didn't realize I felt that way. Why do I feel that way? Let me just move through some of these steps, some of these tools that I've developed, and maybe journal through it or whatever, and get from there to here." All right, we're 46 minutes in, and I don't want to go on too long because it does hurt to talk a little bit, but I want to talk about some of the characters of and how some characters from literature and how they kind of meet up in some of these emotional intelligence pillars that we've talked about here. So the first one, I really like Harry Potter to talk about. I'm just gonna drink some water. I really like the Harry Potter series. I feel that a lot of people resonate with that. It's like easy to understand. Most people have seen and or heard and or read or watched the movies. And so we'll start with Lord Voldemort, he who must not be named, or Tom Riddle. And so his self awareness struggle that he was experiencing was he couldn't confront his own fear of death. And so he had this really big obsession with immortality and with power. So he couldn't see how his fear of dying was controlling him. His self-awareness was really low. As far as empathy, he saw people as tools. He used them for his own goals. He didn't think about their lives or their impact or what they might be feeling or what their life might carry to others. He lacked that empathy. And then his emotional regulation struggle, he was very angry and desired revenge as part of his domination. And he was impulsive and destructive with that in mind. So he was going around just doing whatever, killing and wanting to kill and really desiring this power. And he got really close to it. So, but that's the part of that villain side of that villain archetype side of the story is that they do have some success in that, and it caused a lot of fear. I mean, throughout all of Hogwarts and even beyond, there was a fear that of Lord Voldemort. I mean, they wouldn't even say his name. And then the other character is the early arc of Severus Snape. So his self awareness struggle is recognizing how his bitterness and his unresolved pain shaped his behavior. particularly when it came to Harry's mother, Lily, of how he felt bitter that he didn't get his girl. And there was a little bit of humiliation that went into that as well. I've only I've only listened a couple times. I guess that's a lot because that's a lot of hours. A couple times to Harry Potter while I was working. So forgive me if I'm not like super deep into it. I just know that there's a couple books that were really hard to listen to because I was like so angry. So part of Severus's or Snape's struggles, especially through empathy, is he failed to show compassion towards Harry, who he viewed as a part of his humiliation, his past humiliation. So anytime he saw Harry, he just got really angry because he was so bitter that he didn't get what he wanted. And then finally, his emotional struggles, he had resentment towards Harry's father, which led to him mistreating or treating harshly the students of Gryffindor, particularly Harry, but really all of them. He just had this really broad brush of being resentful. So his emotional regulation or lack thereof was causing all of this strife to happen within the Hogwarts school. And that was just early on in his it was really early on in his teaching, so it was the earlier arc of the story. And then finally, the other one is Draco Malfoy, who, if you've ever read or watched, it's easy for you to kind of like not like him because of how arrogant he is. But he lacks insight into his own insecurities and fear. He he often would try to hurt others in order to prove himself. So he lacked insight into his insecurities, which caused him to act out towards his fellow students, which really created this like, I don't want to be around you, I don't like you kind of self-awareness struggle. And then he struggles to empathize with anybody else's suffering, especially when it came to following Lord Voldemort's orders. And then the other things that I'm thinking about is like, obviously him and Harry are definitely at odds. They both didn't like each other. And then the other one that comes to mind is what's his face? Oh my gosh. Dobby. So his treatment of Dobby. I mean, I know that most of the people in Hogwarts treated the elves in a certain way, but he was very much negative to him as well. No empathy, low empathy for the elves. And then finally, his lack of emotional regulation, he acts out of fear and frustration. So instead of being able to process that inner conflict, because he had this loyalty to his family and his values, he would react out of fear and frustration. One, to be seen in a certain light. Two, to kind of put one over. So to hurt somebody else would kind of elevate himself. And that's where that villain arc comes into play. You're trying to manipulate and make people less than you outside because you don't feel like your fear and insecurity are popping up. So all three of these really kind of fall into that category there. So some other popular stories, I think of Lord of the Rings, the Gollum or Smeagol. He can't reconcile the dual nature. So if you followed any of the Lord of the Rings books and or movies, you know that he was he was trying to help he was trying to help the hobbits go and dispose of the ring, but then his own inner, the power that the ring had over him would cause him to kind of move into this villainous area. So, like, part of him is in this empathetic and or a highly empathetic realm, and then the other part of him is like, no, screw them, kill them right now, take the ring, and let's go. So, but he couldn't reconcile that. It was really difficult for him, kind of bouncing between these two paradigms. It caused maybe a lot of confusion on the inside of like, do I do I feel this way or do I feel that way? So he's feeling both of those things. And I was kind of explaining that in that when I was feeling the envy and the jealousy of do I really feel this way or do I not? And you kind of like, it's normal for you to kind of bounce back and forth as you're like working through these things. It's completely normal. It's okay to feel strongly one way and then to feel strongly another way, especially if you're a woman and you're very emotional, like going back and forth between those things. Emotions are always moving, it's energy moving, and it's energy in motion within us. And so you can see that Gollum or Smeagol, they were having these like inner boss battle. And then excuse me, his obsession with the ring isolates him in that he was living in a cave when the hobbits came and found him. Or not when yeah, when the hobbits came and found him. He was living in isolation because he didn't, he was unable to connect with others. And that's where that empathy piece comes in. And then finally, his emotional regulation, that jealousy and that greed, and ultimately his hatred overwhelm his ability to act rationally and make him unpredictable or volatile. So even when he himself was trying to work through it, he was hurting himself because of his lack of emotional regulation. And then eventually it led to his demise because that greed overtook him. He was unable to manage that emotion with any regulation. He couldn't handle it. It just like, it took him over. It's almost like seeing red when you're angry. It's like he just saw green or whatever greed is. It overtook him and eventually like led to his demise. Let's see. I know that I have, okay. I'll pick one more, and then unless somebody wants to talk about another one, we can definitely do that. But I want to talk about Disney's Scar from The Lion King. So it's not one that we typically think about, but it is one that is, I think, fairly common. So Scar could not admit that his jealousy of Mufasa and Simba came from his feelings of inadequacy. So he was kind of in this shadow aspect of himself, lurking and being really envious and jealous of the situation that Mufasa, his brother, and Simba, his nephew, were in. So that self-awareness struggle that he was having was he couldn't admit to himself that he felt that way or that could even be a feeling. He had no awareness that he was feeling that jealousy or that envy, which seeing that was just showing him day by day, I do not measure up because I don't have what they have. His lack of empathy, he doesn't care anything about the concern of the pride. He's not concerned with how what he is going to do or what he did affected them. All they cared about was his rise to power, his his personal victory, which inevitably, because it wasn't well earned, led to a really terrible situation in the Pride. And then finally, his lack of emotional regulation, his envy and bitterness led his envy and bitterness led to calculated and destructive actions, which continued to isolate him even more. Nobody really wanted him to be, nobody really wanted to serve that. Nobody wants to serve somebody who's sitting in fear and insecurity. And if you look at Mufasa and you look at Scar and you kind of compare these two together, like Mufasa is this gentle, masculine leader, and Scar is kind of this, like, I don't know, slimy. Nobody really wants to talk to him because he just snaps and doesn't hold. So he doesn't regulate himself emotionally very well, which I don't know if you've been around people like that. You don't want to be around people like that, or even characters like that. And so it really isolated him. So all of these characters, the villain archetype will isolate you. Just because you're isolated doesn't mean that you're sitting in the villain archetype, but it is maybe something to think about for yourself. As with all of these characters, the lack of self-awareness is really the lack of seeing where your fears, insecurities, and or maybe your motivation is. And the lack of empathy is kind of related in that, where you can't really put yourself in somebody else's shoes, so to speak. And you're seeing people as tools or as fodder for your own personal goals, which, do you even truly really want those things? Because, when Scar got his power, it kind of, like, everything kind of fell to the wayside. It just turned gross, because he wasn't really prepared and or regulated to handle that. And that's how we can kind of view emotional intelligence, is for people that are leaders. We want our leaders to exhibit these really strong emotional intelligence pillars, because they're going to give us a little bit more. It's not going to be as chaotic. It's going to be a bit more grounded. They're going to be present and confident, and really serve as something inspiring instead of kind of pulling you down and, like, and forgetting about things, just letting things go by the wayside. And then finally, of all these characters, their emotions in anger, jealousy, and fear are really driving them to be to lack the emotional regularity that I think we really desire in other people. Nobody wants to be around somebody that's constantly, like, bitter or biting, and when you're feeling these things, like, you're just reacting immediately instead of, like, pausing and then let's, like, work through that. So we're working on getting away from leaning into destructive behavior, into, like, having some constructive ways to kind of work with others. Before I go, I want to just go through an energetics exercise that I think will be helpful, at least that I've found helpful. So let's say that you're feeling, let's say it's anger, because we've all felt anger. The anger will start in the stomach. You'll start to feel it in that sacral area, or maybe in the root area. And then you can feel it. It just kind of like takes over. You can feel the warmth of your skin. You can feel the emotional response turning into a physical response. And so once you feel that, just don't push it down and don't say like go away unless you need to. If you don't want to emote in one area and you need to take yourself away, you can definitely do that. And I strongly encourage that if you think that you're going to react out of line. But imagine that there's these two pillars inside of your body, okay? And they're going two poles going up and down. Now imagine that emotion, whatever it is, and imagine it, just kind of work it up these two poles and then give it back to God, give it back to the universe, send it back up there. Thank it. Thank you for being here. But really just sit in that feeling. So if you're feeling like I felt that envy and I was like, okay, I feel envy. This is weird. My initial response is I don't feel that way, but I was feeling that way. So I'm going to sit there and I'm just going to imagine it. Should take less than 2 minutes for you to really feel through it. It's about 90 seconds for you to feel an emotion and just kind of let it sit in it, let it go. And then after that, after you've done this exercise where you're moving it up through your body and out of your crown, then you want to start journaling of why was I feeling that way? What about the situation? Mimic something in my past that I could feel as a fear, insecurity, whatever it is, some sort of wounding. Sit there and like let it move up your body, write about it, or even think about it if that's the way that you want to go. Go for a walk, whatever it is. Remember, I told you to like tap deep down into what your child, as a child, what you like to do, and then choose some form of energy work that's going to help you kind of get that out. Once you're able to do that, it will give you a little bit more picture of here's why I was feeling that way and here's where I'm going to go with it. And then once you're done with that, then you can rewrite your story. Because now I've felt the emotion, I've worked through it energetically, either journaling, some sort of physical activity, creating something, whatever it is. Choose a thing, and it can be multiple things if you need it. And then what you're going to want to do is rewrite that story. So for me, I was looking back at my childhood where my stepsisters were being doted on by my stepfather and he didn't care anything about me, and I definitely felt that. There was a feeling of rejection there. And so for me, I'm like, he was doing what he thought was best. I obviously was not his primary person, and that's on him and not me. But me as an adult, I loved me as a child. I thought I was awesome. And I turned out to be a really good kid. And he couldn't see that, but I can see that now, and I can rewrite that story. So that story doesn't hold the power that it did before, when I was just letting these responsive emotions come up in these current situations. And I can get myself out of those situations because I love myself enough to do that. I hope this landed for you guys. I've been going for an hour 10. I will be returning next Tuesday. I think I might change it to an earlier time. I think I like the 3 o'clock start time. I'll check my schedule, but I'll schedule it out so that you guys know when I'm going to be live next time. Thank you so much for joining. If you haven't done so already, if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. If you have not done so, I see that there's a lot of people that have come in and give me a thumbs up, and I appreciate that. And I would also love it if you gave me a sub, and but you should be able to see me more often. My last day at my current job is at the end of next week. And so it will open up more time for me to come on live. And if this is a popular session that people enjoy, I will likely come on more. And but we'll work on that. We'll just start with the one time a week right now. But I do have to boogie. I hope you guys enjoyed. Whew, what a big topic. The last thing I want to say is if you're doing this energy work, please take care of yourself afterwards. Either take a nap, take a long bath, do something really relaxing that you can kind of unwind and re-ground. I really love Epsom salt baths because it helps you to ground and kind of clean away some of the emotions that you're feeling. But you can also just take a shower. I like to take a shower or take a bath, an Epsom salt bath, and then I kind of just like lay in bed and don't think about anything for a while and just to kind of let my mind process what's gone on because energy is still moving through your body and you want to like clean it out. So take some breaths, just be really gentle and kind to yourself. I love you guys so much. I will see you guys next week. Cheers.